The phone was ringing, and I knew even before I picked it up that something was wrong. It was that time of day when the light slants through the kitchen window just so, and everything is supposed to be ordinary. But the ring was too sharp, too insistent. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. Laura, it's your mother. Her voice had that tightness, that thin wire of barely controlled panic she got when she felt the world slipping away from her. Your father hasn't come home from his walk. It's been 3 hours. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was almost 1 in the afternoon. My father walked every morning, same route, same pace. He was back by 11 at the latest, sitting in his chair with the newspaper and a cup of tea that my mother made for him. Did he say where he was going? I asked. He just said he needed some air. He's been doing that lately, you know. Going out and not telling me where. I thought it was just his way of getting some space. But now I'm worried, Laura. I'm really worried. I told her to stay calm, that I would be there in 20 minutes. But my hands were already shaking as I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door. Mark was in the living room, watching some game show with the volume turned low. He looked up as I passed, his eyes flickering from the screen to my face. Where are you going? He asked. My dad didn't come home from his walk. My mother is upset. I need to go over there. He nodded, but he didn't stand up. He didn't offer to come with me. He just said, okay. Call me if you need anything. I wanted to say something, to ask him why he was so distant lately, why everything between us felt like it was wrapped in cellophane. But I didn't have time. I just grabbed my bag and walked out the door. The drive to my parents' house took me through the same streets I had known my whole life. The same oak trees, the same mailboxes, the same cracked sidewalks. Everything looked the same as it always had, but I felt like I was seeing it all for the first time. Or maybe for the last time. I didn't know why that thought crossed my mind. I pushed it away. My mother was standing by the front window when I pulled into the driveway. She was small and bird-like, with gray hair she still tried to keep neat and the same apron she had worn for as long as I could remember. She opened the door before I could even knock. He's never done this before, she said. He always comes back by noon. He knows I worry. He knows I make lunch. I stepped inside and put my hand on her shoulder. We'll find him, Mom. He probably just lost track of time. You know how he gets when he's thinking. She shook her head. No, this is different. He's been different lately. Forgetting things. Leaving the stove on. I found his keys in the freezer last week. The freezer, Laura. Who puts their keys in the freezer? This was the first I was hearing about any of this. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I had been so wrapped up in my own life, in the endless pressure at work, in the distance growing between Mark and me, that I hadn't noticed my own father slipping away. Did you talk to a doctor? I asked. He made me promise not to worry you. He said you had enough on your plate with your job and everything. He said he didn't want to be a burden. Her voice cracked. But I can't do this alone, Laura. I'm not strong enough. I told her she didn't have to do it alone. I was there. But even as I said it, I knew I hadn't been there. Not really. I had been busy. I had been distracted. I had been so focused on my own problems that I had let theirs slip to the back of my mind. Did you call the police? I asked. Not yet. He'll be embarrassed. You know how proud he is. If the police bring him home, he'll never forgive himself. Or me. She paused, wringing her hands. I thought maybe you could drive around the neighborhood. Check the park. He likes to sit by the pond sometimes. I nodded and told her I would find him. I promised her I would bring him home. She looked at me with those tired, worried eyes, and I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. I got back in my car and started driving. I went down the streets I knew, past the houses of neighbors I had grown up with, past the school where I had gone to kindergarten. I checked the little playground, the bench outside the library, the corner store where my father used to buy his morning paper. Nothing. No sign of him. I thought about the last time I had really talked to him. It was 3 weeks ago at a Sunday dinner. He had asked about my job, and I had given him the usual answer, busy, stressful, but fine. He had looked at me with those tired eyes and said something that had stuck with me. He had said, "You don't have to carry everything alone, you know." I had brushed it off, changed the subject to something lighter. Now I wished I had listened. I drove to the pond. It was a small body of water at the edge of the neighborhood, surrounded by overgrown grass and a few old benches. When I was a child, my father used to take me there to feed the ducks. We would sit for hours, him reading his newspaper and me throwing pieces of bread into the water. It was one of the few memories I had of him being still, being present, being mine. And there he was, sitting on the same bench, the old wooden one with the peeling paint. His hands were folded in his lap, and he was staring out at the water. He looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. His shoulders were hunched, and his hair, what was left of it, was white and thin. I parked the car and walked over to him slowly. I didn't want to startle him. When I was close enough, I sat down on the bench next to him. He didn't turn to look at me. He just kept staring at the pond. Dad, I said gently. Mom is worried about you. You've been gone a long time. He blinked a few times, and then he turned his head. For a moment, his eyes were empty, like he was looking through me. Then recognition flickered across his face, and he smiled. It was a confused smile, but it was there. Laura, he said. What are you doing here? I came to find you, Dad. You missed lunch. Mom was getting worried. He looked down at his hands. I was just thinking, he said, about the old days. Before everything got complicated. Complicated how? He didn't answer right away. He just sat there, staring at the water again. Finally, he said, I used to know who I was. I used to know what I was supposed to do. Now I'm not so sure. I took his hand. It was cold, and the skin was thin and papery. What do you mean? I mean I've made mistakes, Laura. Mistakes I'm not proud of. And now I'm trying to make things right, but I don't know if I can. I don't know if it's too late. My heart clenched. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I could hear the pain in his voice. I squeezed his hand and told him it was never too late. I told him we would figure it out together. He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. He stood up slowly, his joints cracking. We should go home. Your mother will be worrying. We walked back to the car in silence. I helped him into the passenger seat and buckled his seatbelt for him. He looked at me with a clarity that was almost startling. You need to watch out for people who smile too much, he said. They're the ones hiding something. I didn't know what to make of that. I just nodded and closed the door. When we got home, my mother was at the door before I even put the car in park. She rushed out and hugged him tightly, and I could see the relief washing over her face. She helped him inside and sat him down in his chair, and within minutes she had a cup of tea in his hands. Later, after he was settled, she pulled me aside. I need you to come with me to his doctor's appointment next week, she said. I can't do it alone. The doctor said there might be some tests. I don't want to hear the results by myself. I agreed. I told her I would take time off work. She thanked me, but there was something in her voice that made me uneasy. Something she wasn't saying. On my way home, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Diane, a colleague of mine. It said, "Did you see the email? The promotion is going to be announced tomorrow. I heard it's between you and Alan." My stomach tightened. Alan had been my rival for years. He was a smooth talker, good at making people feel important, good at taking credit for work he didn't do. I had been working toward this promotion for the last 2 years, putting in extra hours, sacrificing time with my family, letting my marriage drift. I had told myself it was worth it. Now I wasn't so sure. I texted Diane back. "I haven't seen the email." "Are you sure?" she replied almost immediately. "Positive. I have a source. Get ready for some good news." I put the phone down and focused on the road. But my mind was elsewhere. I thought about my father's words, about people who smile too much. Alan smiled all the time. He smiled when he shook your hand. He smiled when he stabbed you in the back. When I got home, Mark was already in bed. He was facing away from me, and the room was dark except for the glow of his phone. I changed into my pajamas and lay down next to him, but I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about my father, about his confusion, about the fear in my mother's eyes. I thought about the promotion, about Alan, about everything I had sacrificed to get where I was. I wondered if it had been worth it. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my boss. It was brief, almost clinical. The promotion had been given to Alan. Congratulations were in order. There was no explanation, no justification. Just the cold, hard fact of it. I read it 3 times before the reality sank in. I wasn't getting the promotion. 2 years of work, 2 years of sacrifice, and it had gone to the man who smiled too much. I called Diane immediately. She answered on the first ring. Laura, I just saw the email. I'm so sorry. That doesn't make any sense. Your numbers are better. Your client reviews are better. How did this happen? I told her I didn't know. I told her I had to go. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the email, trying to make sense of it. Alan had charisma, I knew that. He had a way of making people believe in him. But I had the results. I had the proof. How could they choose him over me? Mark came into the kitchen and asked what was wrong. When I told him, he shrugged. Maybe they saw something you didn't, he said. His tone was so casual, so dismissive, that I felt a flash of anger. What does that mean? I asked. He poured himself a cup of coffee. It means maybe you're too focused on the numbers. Maybe they wanted someone who could connect with people. I was about to argue when the phone rang. It was my mother. She was crying. The doctor called, she said. They want to move your father's appointment to today. They said there were some concerning results from his blood work. Can you come with us? I can't do this alone. I told her I would be there. I hung up and looked at Mark. He was scrolling through his phone, already distant. I wanted to tell him I needed him, that I was hurt by what he had said. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I grabbed my bag and left. At the doctor's office, my mother and I sat in the waiting room while my father was examined. The room was sterile and quiet. My mother kept fidgeting with her purse strap, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds. I've been thinking, she said. Maybe it's time we talked about the future. About what happens when we can't take care of ourselves anymore. I felt a weight pressed down on my chest. We're not there yet, Mom. She shook her head. Your father is changing. I'm changing. We need to be realistic. When the doctor came out, his face was unreadable. He told us my father was showing early signs of cognitive decline. It wasn't severe, but it was there. He recommended a specialist. He used words like monitoring and management. My mother listened silently, nodding. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Afterward, in the parking lot, my mother turned to me. I didn't want to tell you this, she said, but I think I should. Your father's been acting strange about money. I found receipts for things I didn't recognize. Cash withdrawals. Small amounts, but frequent. I asked her if she had confronted him about it. She shook her head. He gets upset. He thinks I don't trust him. I promised her I would look into it. I told her not to worry, that we would figure it out. But as I drove away, my mind was racing. The promotion, Alan's victory, my father's condition, Mark's coldness. It all felt connected somehow, like threads I was only beginning to see. That evening, I was back at my parents' house, helping my mother prepare dinner. My father was in the living room, watching the news. I was about to ask my mother more about the receipts when my phone buzzed. It was Diane again. She sent a text that said, Alan got the promotion because he was backed by someone high up. I think it might be connected to something else. Something bigger. Call me when you can. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and finished chopping the vegetables. My mother talked about the weather, about the neighbors, about small things that felt monumental now. I listened, but my mind was elsewhere. At the end of the evening, my father stood at the door and hugged me. His grip was weak. He whispered in my ear, "Don't trust anyone at work. They'll take everything from you if you let them." I walked to my car feeling hollow. The streetlights flickered above me, and I thought about the day I had had. The losses, the betrayals, the quiet unraveling of everything I thought I knew. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, not starting the engine, just staring at the dashboard. When I finally got home, Mark was asleep. I didn't wake him. I sat in the dark living room, replaying every conversation, every small moment I might have missed. I thought about my father's words, about the receipts, about Alan's sudden rise. I thought about my mother's worry, my husband's distance. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The threads would tighten. The secrets would surface. And I would be forced to decide how much I was willing to lose to uncover the truth. I woke up the next morning with a knot in my stomach that hadn't gone away. My first thought was my father. My second was Alan. I lay in bed listening to Mark getting ready for work, the clink of his coffee mug, the shuffle of his feet. He didn't come back to say goodbye. I waited until I heard the front door close, and then I got up. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop. I started making a list of questions. Who backed Alan? Why would anyone sabotage me? And what did my father's strange cash withdrawals have to do with any of this? I didn't have answers, but I knew I needed to find them. I called Diane first. She answered on the second ring, her voice low and urgent. Laura, I've been doing some digging. Alan's been meeting with someone from the head office. Someone who shouldn't be involved in mid-level promotions. I think they're connected to a project you worked on last year. The one that got shelved. I thought back to that project. It was a logistics optimization initiative for a major client. I had spent months on it, pulling data, building models, presenting to stakeholders. Then it was suddenly scrapped. No explanation. No follow-up. I had assumed it was budget-related. Diane said, I think someone stole your work and repackaged it. I think Alan is just the messenger. I hung up feeling colder than I did before. If she was right, this wasn't just a lost promotion. This was something calculated, something that had been in motion for a long time. I took a breath and called my mother. She told me my father had a restless night, but he was calm now, sitting in the backyard. She asked if I had found anything about the receipts. I told her I would look into it today. I wasn't sure where to start, so I drove to my parents' house and asked my mother to show me the receipts. She pulled out a small envelope from the kitchen drawer. Inside were a dozen slips of paper. All from the same ATM. All in the same small amounts. $50. $60. $45. I asked her if my father had ever mentioned what he was spending on. She shook her head. He said it was nothing. But I know him. He's always been careful with money. This isn't like him. I took the receipts and headed to the bank. The teller was a young woman with bright red lipstick and a name tag that said Megan. She was friendly but cautious. She told me she couldn't give me specifics without my father's authorization. I explained the situation, the cognitive concerns, the family need. She hesitated, then said she could look at the account activity, but couldn't share details unless I was on the account. I wasn't. I left the bank frustrated. I was about to call my mother when my phone rang. It was the hospital. My father had had a fall. He was in the emergency room. I drove there with my heart pounding. When I arrived, my mother was already in the waiting room, pale and trembling. She stood up when she saw me and grabbed my arm. He tripped over the garden hose, she said. He didn't break anything, but they want to keep him for observation. I sat next to her and took her hand. She was shaking. I can't do this alone, she said. I'm not strong enough. I told her she didn't have to do it alone. I would be there. But even as I said it, I knew I wasn't being entirely honest. I was already being pulled in too many directions. When we were allowed to see him, my father was sitting up in bed, looking embarrassed. He had a small bandage on his forehead. I'm sorry to be a bother, he said. It was just a clumsy moment. I sat beside him and took his hand. Dad, I need to ask you something. It's about the receipts Mom found. The cash withdrawals. Can you tell me what they were for? He looked away. His jaw tightened. I was helping someone, he said. A friend. He needed money, and I trusted him. I asked who the friend was. He didn't answer. He just stared at the window. Dad, please. I need to understand. He turned back to me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear. Some things are better left alone, Laura. Trust me on this. I didn't push further. I could see he was tired, and I didn't want to upset him. But I made a mental note to find out who this friend was. Later that evening, I was back home, scrolling through the receipts again. I noticed one of them had a timestamp that corresponded to a day I was out of town. A day I had been at a work conference. A conference where I had first heard about the shelved project being reopened by someone else. I started connecting dots that I didn't yet fully understand. My father's friend. The project. Alan's promotion. It felt like pieces of a puzzle that shouldn't fit together, but somehow did. Mark came home and asked how my father was. I told him briefly, and he nodded, but he was already distracted by his phone. I asked him if he had seen anything unusual in our own accounts. He looked up confused. What are you talking about? He asked. I told you about the receipts. The patterns. I'm just wondering if there's anything we should be concerned about on our end. He stared at me. Are you accusing me of something? I said no, but the question hung in the air. He went to the other room, and I sat alone, realizing how much distance had grown between us. I couldn't remember the last time we had a real conversation. I called Diane back and told her everything. About my father, about the receipts, about the friend he wouldn't name. She listened in silence. When I finished, she said, I think you need to look at the old project files. See who else had access. See if any of the numbers don't add up. I stayed up late into the night, digging through the files. They were still on the company server. I scrolled through the notes, the meeting minutes, the financial breakdowns. And then I found it. A small discrepancy. An invoice that had been paid to a vendor I never authorized. A vendor with a name I didn't recognize. I searched for the vendor online. It was a shell company. Registered to a P.O. box. No employees, no website. I called the number listed, and it rang endlessly. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the quiet way my father said he trusted someone. I kept thinking about Alan's sudden victory. I kept thinking about Mark's cold shoulder. I felt like I was surrounded by people who knew more than they were telling me. The next morning, I confronted my father again. I was gentle, but I was insistent. I told him I needed to understand. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, I was trying to help someone I thought was a friend. I didn't know it would hurt you. I asked him again who it was. He paused, and then he said, it was someone from your company. Someone who used to work there. He came to me with a story, and I believed him. My stomach dropped. What was his name? He shook his head. I can't remember. It's been so long. But he said he knew you. He said he wanted to help us. He said he had an investment opportunity. I felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just a friend. This was someone who had targeted my father, who had used his confusion and his trust. I didn't know who it was, but I was determined to find out. I went back to work and asked for a meeting with my boss. I sat across from him and presented the discrepancy. I showed him the shell company, the unpaid vendor. He told me he would look into it. But his face was impassive, and I didn't trust him either. I started noticing things I had missed before. The way Alan avoided me in the hallways. The way my boss never met my eyes. The way the office felt hostile, like a place I was being slowly pushed out of. Diane found me in the break room. She whispered, I heard they're moving your accounts. Giving them to Alan. You're being marginalized. I felt a surge of anger. They can't do that. I built those relationships. She touched my arm. They can do whatever they want. You need to protect yourself. I went home that night and sat in my car outside my parents' house. I was trying to piece together the timeline, the receipts, the project, the vendor, the promotion. I mapped it out on my phone and a pattern emerged. Dates aligned. Names overlapped. I realized someone close to my father was involved. Someone who knew about his trust, his generosity, his confusion. Someone who had taken advantage. I thought about the man my father used to be. Sharp. No nonsense. He never would have fallen for something like this. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. It was an assault on the man he once was. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. He asked where I was. I told him. He said, you're spending too much time there. You're not sleeping. You're not eating. You're driving yourself crazy. I told him this was my family. He said, and what about us? What about our marriage? The question hit me hard. I had been so focused on my father's crisis and the office betrayal that I hadn't stopped to think about what was happening at home. I didn't have an answer for him. I drove home and found him waiting in the living room. He was sitting on the couch with his arms crossed. He said, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for a partner. Someone who was present. I wanted to argue, but I didn't have the energy. I said, I am present. I'm here. He shook his head. You're here physically. But your mind is somewhere else. It has been for months. I sat down across from him. I asked him if he knew anything about the money I had found in my father's accounts. He looked shocked. He said, you think I took money from your father? I didn't answer. The silence was its own answer. He stood up and walked out of the room. I heard him slam the bedroom door. I was left alone with my thoughts. I realized I was losing everything. My father's trust, my career, my marriage. And I wasn't sure how to stop it. The only thing I had was the truth, and I was determined to find it. The morning after my fight with Mark, I woke up to an empty bed. The sheets on his side were cold. He had already left for work. There was no note, no text message. The silence in the house was heavy, like a blanket I couldn't shake off. I made coffee and drank it standing at the counter, watching the gray light come through the window. The house felt hollow. I called my mother. She told me my father was doing better, but he was quiet. He spent most of the day looking out the window, not saying much. She said, "He asked about you last night. He wanted to know if you were okay." I told him you were fine, but I don't think he believed me. I told her I would come by later. I needed to go to work first. I had to face whatever was waiting for me there. When I got to the office, I found that my desk had been moved. My personal items were in a cardboard box on the floor. A new intern, a young woman with glasses and a nervous smile, was sitting in my chair. She looked up at me with wide eyes, like she knew she was in someone else's space. "Can I help you?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. My photos, my notes, my little plant that had survived 3 years on my desk, all of it was in that box. I felt my face grow hot. I walked to my boss's office. He was on the phone when I knocked, but he waved me in. He finished his call quickly and leaned back in his chair. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Laura," he said. "I was meaning to talk to you. We're restructuring. Your role is changing. You'll be reporting to Alan now." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. Reporting to Alan, the man who stole my work. He held up a hand. "Let's not use that language. Alan is a team player. He's been with the company for a long time, and he has a good rapport with the clients. You need to adapt. That's what we do here. We adapt." I stared at him. I wanted to say something, to scream, to throw something across the room. But I didn't. I just turned around and walked out. I went to the break room and locked myself in the bathroom. I stood there, gripping the sink, staring at my own reflection in the mirror. I told myself I wasn't going to cry. But I did. I cried until my eyes were red and my throat was raw. Diane found me a few minutes later. She knocked on the door and asked if I was okay. When I didn't answer, she said, "Laura, I brought you a coffee. You need to stay strong. Please open the door." I opened the door and took the coffee. She looked at me with concern, her eyes soft and kind. She said, "I heard about the reorg. It's not right. It's not fair." I thanked her. I drank the coffee, but I couldn't taste it. I thought about my father's words. People who smile too much. Alan smiled all the time. I had thought it was just his personality. Now I realized it was his shield. I spent the morning going through my files. I was supposed to hand them over to Alan. I took my time, flipping through pages, scanning documents. And then I noticed something. A memo from a vendor that referenced the project I had worked on. A vendor that matched the shell company I had found in the records. I didn't hand over that memo. I slipped it into my bag. At lunch, I called the bank again. I asked to speak to a manager. A woman named Patricia came on the line. She had a calm, steady voice. I explained the situation with my father, the strange withdrawals, the concern about financial exploitation. She listened carefully. She said, "I can verify that the withdrawals were made from your father's account. But I can't share the account holder's name without proper authorization. However, I can tell you that the funds were transferred to an account associated with a local business." I asked what business. She paused. "I can't share that specifically. But I can tell you that the business is registered under a name that might be familiar to you. It's the same name as a vendor your company uses." My blood ran cold. I thanked her and hung up. I called my mother. I told her I thought I had found something important. I said I needed to come over and talk to her and Dad in person. She said she would be waiting. When I arrived at the house, my father was in the backyard, sitting in his old chair, watching the birds at the feeder. He seemed calm, almost content. I sat down next to him. "Dad," I said gently, "do you remember a man named Gerald?" He looked at me. His eyes were cloudy, distant. Then something flickered. He said, "Gerald. He used to work at the company. He was a good man." helped me with my finances. He was always offering to help. I asked him if Gerald was the friend he had been helping. He didn't answer. He just looked back at the birds. My mother came outside and stood behind me. I told her what I had found. Gerald was a former employee of my company. He had left a few years ago, quietly, without any fanfare. He had worked in accounts payable. He would have had access to vendor information. He would have known how to set up a shell company. My mother's face went pale. Why would your father trust him? I told her I didn't know, but I remembered something. Gerald used to come to our house for dinner when I was a teenager. He was friendly, always cracking jokes, always bringing small gifts. My father thought of him like a son. He trusted him completely. I felt sick. Gerald had used that trust. He had used my father's cognitive decline. He had funneled money into a fake account. And, somehow, my company was involved. I went back to the office that afternoon. I waited until everyone had left. The building was quiet, the hallways empty. I went to the archives and pulled Gerald's old files. They were buried deep, covered in dust. I flipped through them slowly, carefully. And then I found it. A memo. A project that was supposed to have been canceled. A project that Gerald had kept alive by padding invoices, by creating fake vendors, by funneling money through the shell company. The same project I had worked on. The same project Alan had taken credit for. It all came together. Gerald had set up the shell company. He had siphoned money from my company through it. My father's withdrawals were his attempts to help Gerald, not knowing what he was really doing. Alan was the inside man. He had used Gerald's infrastructure to take credit for my work. I took photos of everything with my phone. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps. I looked up, and Alan was standing in the doorway. He was surprised to see me. Laura, he said. What are you doing here? I told him I was catching up on work. He didn't believe me. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. I know you've been digging, he said. I know you found the vendor files. You need to stop, Laura. You need to let this go. I asked him why. He didn't answer. He just stepped closer and said, people get hurt when they dig too deep. You have a family. Think about them. It was a threat. I heard it in his voice, cold and sharp. I held my ground. I'm not afraid of you, I said. He laughed. It was a cold laugh, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. You should be. He walked away. I waited until I heard the door close, and then I left too. I was shaking when I got to my car. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my breathing. I didn't drive home. I drove to my parents' house. I told my mother and father everything. My father's face went pale when I mentioned Gerald's name. Gerald was like a son to me, he whispered. I didn't know he was using me. My mother held his hand. I told them I was going to expose everything. I was going to take it to the head office, to the CEO, to whoever would listen. My father looked at me with worried eyes. Be careful, he said. People like that are dangerous. I promised him I would be careful. But I knew there was no going back now. That night, Mark was waiting for me at home. He was sitting on the couch, his hands clasped together. He hadn't turned on the television. He just sat there in the silence. I heard about the reorg, he said. I'm sorry. I told him it was fine. It wasn't fine, but I didn't want to argue. He stood up and walked toward me. I think we need to talk about us, he said. I felt the weight of the day press down on me. I didn't want to have this conversation now. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Mark said, you're gone all the time. You don't talk to me. You don't touch me. I feel like I'm married to a stranger. I wanted to tell him I was doing all of this for us, for our future. But the words didn't come out. Instead, I said, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how bad it was. He nodded. He looked tired, too. I need to know if you still want this. If you still want us. I didn't have an answer. I wasn't sure I knew anymore. I was so consumed by the chaos around me that I had forgotten what I was fighting for. He went to the other room. I sat in the living room, staring at the wall. I thought about my father's trust, my mother's fear, Alan's threat. I thought about Mark's question. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I only knew I couldn't stop now. The truth was the only thing I had left. I woke up with the memo in my bag and the photos on my phone. I had everything I needed to take to the head office. But I hesitated. Alan's threat was still ringing in my ears. He knew something I didn't. He had connections I couldn't see. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, weighing my options. I called Diane from my car on the way to work. I told her everything I had found. The memo, the invoices, the shell company, the connection to Gerald, Alan's role in it all. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "You need to be careful, Laura. There's something I didn't tell you. I heard Alan talking the other day. He mentioned your father by name." I felt the world tilt. "He knows about my father?" Diane said, "I think this goes deeper than we thought. I think Gerald and Alan have been working together for years. I think they have a whole network set up. And I think your father isn't the only person they've targeted." I hung up and drove straight to my parents' house. I didn't go to work. I walked in the door and found my mother in the kitchen, washing dishes. I told her they were in danger. She looked at me with wide eyes. "What do you mean, in danger?" she asked. "I mean there are people who don't want me to find the truth. And they know about Dad. They mentioned him by name. I think they might try to hurt you." My father was sitting in his chair in the living room. He had heard me. He stood up slowly, his face pale. "I'm not going to be chased out of my own home," he said. "This is my house. I'm staying here." I told him it wasn't about being chased out. It was about being safe. My mother looked at me, her hands trembling. "What do we do?" she asked. I told them they needed to come stay with me. Just for a little while, until I figured out what was going on. My father resisted at first, but my mother finally convinced him. She packed a small bag for each of them, and we drove to my house. I locked all the doors. I called a locksmith and had new deadbolts installed. I told my mother not to open the door for anyone, no matter who they said they were. Then I went to the head office. I walked into the building with my head held high. I asked to see the CEO. The receptionist told me he was unavailable. I waited. I sat in the lobby for hours, watching people come and go, watching the clock on the wall tick past noon, past 1, past 2. Finally, I was let in. The CEO was a man named Mr. Henderson. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair and a calm, measured way of speaking. He sat behind a massive desk and gestured for me to sit across from him. "I understand you have something to share with me," he said. I laid out everything. The memo. The invoices. The shell company. The connection to Gerald. The role Alan had played. I showed him the photos on my phone. I told him about my father, about the withdrawals, about the manipulation. Mr. Henderson listened. His face was unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "This is serious," he said. "I will have our legal team investigate. Thank you for bringing this to my attention." I left the meeting feeling both relieved and terrified. I had done what I set out to do. But I had also made enemies. Powerful enemies who would not take kindly to being exposed. That night, I went home to find Mark sitting in the dark. He hadn't turned on any lights. He was just sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was flat, empty. I sat down next to him. "What is it?" "I was contacted today. A man called Gerald. He said you were making trouble. He said if you didn't stop, things would get worse. He mentioned you. He mentioned your parents. He mentioned me." I felt my blood run cold. "He threatened you?" Mark nodded. "He said I should talk to you. Make you see reason. He said if you kept digging, people would get hurt." I reached for his hand. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to touch you." He pulled his hand away. "I don't want to be involved in this, Laura. I can't be involved in this. I have my own job, my own life. I can't be worrying about threats from people I don't even know." I told him I understood. I told him I would handle it. He said, "I need some space. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. Just until this blows over." I didn't argue. I let him leave. I sat alone in the dark, feeling more isolated than I had ever felt. I had lost my husband. I had endangered my parents. I had made enemies of powerful people. I wondered if I had made a mistake. The next morning, I got a call from the legal team. They had opened an investigation. They wanted to interview me. I agreed. I went to their office. They were thorough, methodical. They asked detailed questions. I answered honestly. I told them everything I knew. But I also noticed something. The legal team was careful. calculated. They weren't just investigating. They were building a case against someone. I wasn't sure if I was the witness or the target. I called Diane after the interview. She said, I heard they're looking at Gerald. They think he was siphoning money from multiple projects. They think Alan was his partner. But they don't have enough evidence yet. They're trying to find a link. I asked her if they had arrested anyone. She said no. Not yet. I went back to my parents' house. My father was sitting in the same chair, staring out the window. He seemed smaller, more fragile than before. His hands were folded in his lap, and he looked lost. I sat down next to him. I told him we had found the truth. I told him the legal team was investigating. He didn't react. He just stared at the window. My mother pulled me aside. He's been like this all day, she whispered. I think the stress is making things worse. The doctor said we need to keep him calm, but how can I keep him calm when all of this is happening? I felt a wave of guilt. I had done this. I had exposed him to danger. I had brought this chaos into his life. I sat with my father for a long time. I held his hand. I told him I was sorry. I told him I loved him. He looked at me. For a moment, his eyes were clear. He said, I know you're trying to do the right thing. I'm proud of you. But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. I promised him I would. That evening, I got another call from the legal team. They wanted to meet again. I went back to their office. This time, they were more aggressive. They asked about my father's finances. They asked about his relationship with Gerald. They asked if I had ever seen any evidence of collusion between my father and Gerald. I told them the truth. My father was a victim. He had been manipulated. They nodded. They took notes. But I could see the skepticism in their eyes. On my way out, I ran into Alan in the hallway. He was standing by the elevator, a smug smile on his face. How's the investigation going? He asked. I didn't answer. I just walked past him. He called after me. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you're going to take everyone down. But you have no idea what you're up against. I kept walking. I didn't look back. When I got to my car, I sat there for a long time. My hands were shaking. I thought about everything I had lost. My husband. My peace of mind. My sense of safety. I thought about everything I had yet to lose. I called my mother. I told her I was coming over. She said, we'll be here. We'll always be here. I drove to their house. I walked in the door and my mother hugged me. She held me tight. She didn't ask any questions. She just held me. My father was in his chair. He looked up and smiled. It was a weak smile, but it was there. I sat with them for the rest of the night. We watched television. We ate dinner. We talked about nothing important. It was the most normal I had felt in weeks. Before I left, my father took my hand. He said, you're stronger than you think. Don't let them break you. I kissed his cheek and told him I wouldn't. I drove home with those words echoing in my mind. I didn't know what the next day would bring. I didn't know if I would win or lose. But I knew I couldn't give up. Not now. Not when I had come so far. The investigation moved faster than I expected. I was called in for interviews almost every day. The legal team was thorough, relentless. They pored over every document I had given them. They cross-referenced every name, every date, every transaction. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Gerald was identified as the mastermind. He had set up the shell company years ago, long before my father got involved. He had used it to siphon money from multiple projects across multiple departments. It was a sprawling operation, carefully concealed behind layers of paperwork and fake vendors. Alan was identified as his accomplice. He had been feeding Gerald information from the inside. He had helped him identify vulnerable targets, including my father. He had also taken credit for my work, using Gerald's infrastructure to make himself look indispensable. The two of them had been working together for nearly 3 years. But there was a problem. The evidence was strong, but not ironclad. Gerald denied everything. He claimed the shell company was a legitimate business venture that had gone sour. He said my father had invested willingly, without any coercion. Alan claimed he was unaware of Gerald's activities. He said he had simply been doing his job, following orders from above. The CEO was hesitant to act. He was afraid of the publicity. He worried about the company's reputation, about the stock price, about the fallout from a public scandal. He wanted to handle things quietly, internally. He offered Gerald a severance package in exchange for his resignation. He offered Alan a transfer to a different department. I was furious when I heard this. I went to Mr. Henderson's office and demanded an explanation. You can't just let them walk away, I said. They stole from this company. They stole from my father. They ruined lives. Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair. He looked tired, worn down. I understand your frustration, Laura. But we have to be practical. A public trial would be messy. It would drag the company through the mud. It would hurt our clients, our employees, our shareholders. Sometimes the best solution is the quiet one. I told him I would not accept that. I told him I would go to the press. I would tell my story. I would make sure everyone knew what had happened. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and warning. If you do that, you'll be putting yourself at risk. You'll be putting your family at risk. Think carefully before you make a decision you can't undo. I left his office with my head spinning. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to fight. Part of me wanted to give up. I called Diane and told her everything. She said, if you don't fight, they'll get away with it. Gerald will take his money and disappear. Alan will find another job and do the same thing all over again. You can't let that happen. I knew she was right. But I was scared. I had already lost so much. I didn't know if I could afford to lose more. My father's condition continued to worsen. The stress of everything had taken a toll on him. He was confused more often now, forgetting where he was, forgetting who I was. My mother was exhausted. She barely slept. She spent most of her days sitting by his side, holding his hand. One evening, I went to their house to help with dinner. My father was in his chair, watching the news. He seemed calm, alert. I sat down next to him and took his hand. Dad, I said. I need to ask you something. It's about Gerald. Do you remember him? He looked at me. His eyes were cloudy, but there was a flicker of recognition. Gerald. He was my friend. He helped me with my money. I asked him if he remembered giving Gerald money. He paused, and then he nodded. He said he needed it. He said he was in trouble. I wanted to help. I asked him if Gerald had ever threatened him. He shook his head. No. He was always kind. He said I was like a father to him. I felt a wave of anger. Gerald had manipulated him. He had used his kindness, his trust, his confusion. He had taken advantage of a man who couldn't defend himself. I stayed with my father until he fell asleep. Then I went home and sat in the dark living room. I thought about everything I had lost. My career. My marriage. My peace of mind. I thought about everything I still had to lose. My parents. My home. My sanity. I called Mark. He answered on the third ring. His voice was tired, distant. Laura, he said. What do you need? I need to know if you still love me, I said. There was a long silence. Then he said, I do. But I don't know if that's enough anymore. I felt my heart break. I asked him if he would come home. He said he needed more time. He said he couldn't live in the middle of chaos anymore. He needed stability. He needed peace. I told him I understood. I told him I would try to fix things. I hung up and sat in the darkness, feeling more alone than I had ever felt. The next morning, I woke up with a new resolve. I couldn't control what Mark did. I couldn't control what the company did. But I could control what I did. I decided to fight. I called Diane and told her I was going to the press. She said she would help me. She had contacts, she said. Journalists who specialized in corporate corruption. She would set up a meeting. Before I could act, the legal team contacted me. They had new evidence. Gerald's shell company had been linked to a larger network of fraud. The authorities were getting involved. Criminal charges were being considered. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe I didn't need to go to the press after all. Maybe the system would work. But then I got another call. This one was from my mother. My father had had a stroke. He was in the hospital. I raced to the emergency room. My mother was in the waiting room, pale and shaking. She said he was fine this morning. He ate breakfast. He talked about the garden. And then he just collapsed. I sat next to her and held her hand. We waited for hours. Finally, a doctor came out. He said my father was stable but weak. He had suffered a mild stroke. He would need rehabilitation. He might not recover fully. I asked if I could see him. The doctor nodded. I walked into his room and found him lying in bed, his eyes half closed. I sat next to him and took his hand. Dad, I whispered. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. He squeezed my hand. It was a weak squeeze, but it was there. He said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. I told him I loved him. I told him we were going to get through this together. I stayed with him all night. I didn't leave his side. In the morning, the doctor said he was out of immediate danger. He would need care, but he would live. I called Mark and told him what had happened. He asked if I needed him. I said yes. He said he was coming home. I waited for him in the parking lot. When he arrived, he hugged me. It was a real hug, the kind we hadn't shared in months. He said, I'm sorry for everything. I should have been there. I didn't say anything. I just held him. For a moment, I felt like we were going to be okay. The legal team continued their investigation. Gerald was arrested. The news spread quickly. Alan was questioned. He tried to distance himself, but the evidence was too strong. He was fired. His career was ruined. I was offered my old position back, with a promotion. I turned it down. I told them I needed a break. I needed to take care of my family. My father came home from the hospital a week later. He was still weak, but he was improving. He spent most of his time in his chair, watching the birds. My mother cooked his favorite meals. I visited every day. Mark and I started talking again. Real conversations. We didn't solve everything, but we started to rebuild. He told me he regretted the distance between us. He said he had been scared. He didn't know how to help me. I told him I had been scared too. We promised to do better. Diane visited me one afternoon. She said she was proud of me. She told me she was leaving the company. She had found a better job, a healthier environment. I told her I was happy for her. I spent my days at my parents' house. I helped my father with his exercises. I cooked with my mother. I laughed again. It was a strange feeling after so much pain. But I couldn't forget the threat. The anonymous message. It still haunted me. I asked the authorities if they could trace it. They said it came from an untraceable number. Probably someone connected to Gerald. I decided not to let it control me. I was not going to live in fear. I had come too far to let a threat stop me now. Gerald's arrest made the local news. I watched the report on my mother's television, sitting on the couch with my parents on either side of me. The reporter stood outside the courthouse, her face serious, her voice steady. She said Gerald had been charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and financial exploitation of an elderly person. The camera showed him being led into the building, his hands cuffed behind his back. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Defeated. My mother reached for my hand. She squeezed it tight. My father watched the screen with a blank expression. He didn't say anything. He just stared. The next day, Alan was called in for questioning. He was not arrested, but he was fired. The company issued a brief statement saying they had completed an internal investigation and had taken appropriate action. No details were given. No names were mentioned. But everyone knew what had happened. Diane called me that afternoon. She was breathless, excited. She said, they're going to press charges. Gerald is going to trial. And Alan is blacklisted. He'll never work in this industry again. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I had wanted justice. I had wanted them to pay for what they had done. But now that it was happening, I didn't feel the triumph I had expected. I just felt tired. I went to the office one last time. I had to collect my things. I walked through the hallways, past the cubicles and the meeting rooms, past the faces of people I had worked with for years. Some of them avoided my eyes. Some of them nodded sadly. A few of them stopped me to say they were sorry, that they had always known something was wrong. I packed my box and carried it out to my car. I didn't look back. I spent the next few weeks at my parents' house. My father was improving slowly. He could walk with a cane now, and he could hold a conversation, though his words sometimes came slowly. My mother was more relaxed. She smiled more. She cooked his favorite meals and made sure he took his medications on time. One evening, I was sitting with my father on the back porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He was quiet, watching the birds at the feeder. "I'm proud of you," he said suddenly. "You did what you had to do, even when it was hard." I told him I didn't do it for me. I did it for him. For Mom. For everyone Gerald had hurt. He nodded. "I know. That's what makes it right." Mark and I started counseling. It wasn't easy. We had to talk about things we had been avoiding for years. We had to be honest about our fears and our regrets. But slowly, we started to find our way back to each other. He told me he had been afraid of my success. He said he felt like he was being left behind, like I was becoming someone he didn't recognize. I told him I had been afraid of losing him. I had been so focused on work, on the promotion, on proving myself, that I hadn't noticed him slipping away. We promised to do better. We promised to talk more, to listen more, to make time for each other. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Diane came to visit one weekend. She brought a bottle of wine and a homemade pie. We sat in my kitchen and talked for hours. She told me about her new job, her new colleagues, her new boss. She said she felt like she could breathe again. "I miss you, though," she said. "I miss having someone to talk to who understands." I told her I missed her too. I told her we would stay in touch. We had been through too much together to let a little distance come between us. The trial date was set. Gerald would be tried in 3 months. The authorities said they had a strong case. They had forensic accountants, bank records, witness testimony. They were confident. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The anonymous threat still lingered in my mind. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me. I kept checking my phone, waiting for another message. My mother noticed my anxiety. She asked me what was wrong. I told her I was just tired. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. One evening, I was driving home from my parents' house when I noticed a car behind me. It was a dark sedan, unfamiliar. It followed me for several blocks. I turned down a side street, and it turned with me. I turned again, and it followed. My heart started pounding. I sped up. The car sped up too. I ran a red light, and the car hesitated. I lost it at the next intersection. I drove straight to the police station. I told them what had happened. They took a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do without a license plate number or a description of the driver. They told me to be careful. They told me to call if it happened again. I called Mark from the parking lot. He came and picked me up. He held me while I cried. He said, "I'm not going to let anything happen to you. We're going to get through this." The next day, I decided to take action. I hired a private investigator. His name was Frank, retired police officer with a calm demeanor and a no-nonsense attitude. I told him everything. The threats, the car, Gerald's network of associates. Frank listened carefully. He took notes. He said, "I'll look into it. But I want you to be careful. These people don't play by the rules." I told him I understood. A week later, Frank called me with news. He said the anonymous message had been traced to a burner phone. The phone had been purchased at a convenience store near Gerald's old address. He said there was a good chance the message had been sent by someone connected to Gerald. He also told me he had found something else. Gerald had a partner. Not Alan. Someone else. Someone who had been helping him run the shell company from the beginning. Someone who was still out there. I asked him who it was. He said he didn't have a name yet, but he was working on it. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. The threat wasn't over. Gerald was in jail, but his network was still intact. Alan was gone, but someone else was still pulling the strings. I went to visit Gerald in prison. I wanted to look him in the eye. I wanted to ask him why he had done it. I wanted to see if he had any remorse. He was sitting in the visiting room, wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked older, gaunt. He didn't smile when he saw me. "What do you want?" he asked. I sat down across from him. "I want to know who your partner is. The one who's still out there." He laughed. It was a hollow, bitter sound. "You think I'm going to tell you? I think you have nothing left to lose. I think you might want to do one decent thing before you spend the rest of your life in here." He stared at me. His eyes were hard, cold. Then he leaned forward. "Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you," he said. Because there are things worse than prison. There are people who make sure you never get out. I left the prison feeling more unsettled than before. Gerald wasn't afraid. He wasn't remorseful. He was just angry. I called Frank and told him what Gerald had said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think I know who the partner is. I've been following a money trail. It leads to someone in the head office. Someone high up. My stomach dropped. Who, he said, I need to be sure before I tell you. Give me another week. I agreed. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Someone in the head office. Someone high up. Someone who had been protected all along. I started looking at everyone differently. My boss. The legal team. Even Mr. Henderson. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Mark noticed my restlessness. He asked what was wrong. I told him about Frank, about the partner, about the head office connection. He held my hand and told me we would figure it out together. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I'm here. Whatever happens. I leaned into him and felt a small measure of peace. The next week was agonizing. I went through the motions, visiting my parents, helping my father with his therapy, cooking dinner with my mother. But my mind was elsewhere. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Frank to call. When he finally did, his voice was serious. He said, I know who it is. It's someone you wouldn't expect. Someone who had access to everything. Someone who was in a position to cover up the fraud. I asked him who. He paused. It's the head of legal, he said. Thomas Whitfield. I felt the world tilt. Thomas Whitfield was the man who had been leading the investigation. He had been interviewing me, questioning me, pretending to help. He had been playing me all along. I sat down, gripping the phone. Are you sure? Frank said, I'm sure. He's been siphoning money through a separate channel. He was Gerald's main contact. He's been controlling everything from the beginning. I felt a surge of anger. I had trusted him. I had told him everything. He had used my own words against me. I thanked Frank and hung up. I sat in my living room, staring at the wall. I didn't know what to do. I had no evidence. No proof. Just Frank's word. Mark came home and found me there. He asked what was wrong. I told him. He said, what are you going to do? I told him I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let Thomas Whitfield get away with it. Not after everything. I called Diane. I told her what I had found. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, Laura, you need to be careful. If Whitfield is behind this, he's dangerous. He has power. He has connections. I told her I knew. But I had come too far to stop now. I spent the night planning. I went through my notes, my photos, my records. I looked for anything that connected Whitfield to Gerald, to the shell company, to the fraud. I found a few threads, but nothing concrete. I realized I needed more. I needed to confront him. I needed to see his face when he realized I knew. The next morning, I made an appointment to see Thomas Whitfield. I told his assistant I had new information about the case. He agreed to see me. I walked into his office with my head held high. He was sitting behind his desk, calm and composed. He smiled when he saw me. Laura, he said. What can I do for you? I closed the door behind me. I sat down across from him. I said, I know about the money, Thomas. I know about Gerald. I know about the shell company. And I know about your role in all of it. His smile faltered. Just for a moment. Then it returned. I'm not sure what you're talking about, he said. I didn't back down. I laid out everything. The trail of money. The connections. The evidence. I told him I had hired a private investigator. I told him I had proof. He listened. His face was unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. You're making a mistake, he said. You have no proof. Just accusations. And accusations don't hold up in court. I stood up. We'll see about that, I said. I walked out of his office. My heart was pounding. I didn't know if I had made a mistake. But I knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. I called Frank and told him what I had done. He said, You've stirred the hornet's nest. Now you need to be careful. He's going to come after you. I told him I was ready. That night, I went to my parents' house. I sat with my father and watched the sunset. He asked me what was wrong. I told him I was fighting a battle. He told me to keep fighting. I held his hand and felt a small measure of peace. No matter what happened, I had my family. And that was worth everything. The days after confronting Thomas Whitfield were some of the longest of my life. I went through the motions, visiting my parents, helping my father with his exercises, cooking meals with my mother. But my mind was elsewhere. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew Whitfield wouldn't take my threat lightly. Frank called me every evening with updates. He was building a case, he said. He had found more connections, more documents, more witnesses. He was confident we would have enough evidence to take to the authorities soon. But I was running out of patience. Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in Whitfield's office. I had looked him in the eye and told him I knew. Now I had to prove it. My father noticed my restlessness. He was more lucid now, his mind clearer since the stroke. He sat with me on the back porch one afternoon and asked what was troubling me. I told him about Whitfield. I told him about the network, the cover-up, the threat that still hung over us. He listened quietly, his hands folded in his lap. Then he said, "You've always been a fighter, Laura. Even when you were a little girl. You never backed down from anything. That's what I love about you." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I'm scared, Dad. I'm scared of what he might do." He reached over and took my hand. "Fear is normal. But don't let it stop you. You've come too far to turn back now." I squeezed his hand and nodded. I knew he was right. The next day, Frank called with news. He had found a witness. A former employee of the company who had worked closely with Whitfield. She had seen documents, heard conversations, knew about the shell company. She was willing to testify. I felt a surge of hope. This was it. This was what we needed. Frank arranged a meeting. We met at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. The witness was a woman named Patricia. She was in her late 40s, with tired eyes and a nervous way of twisting her hands. She told me she had been Whitfield's assistant for 5 years. She had seen everything. The altered invoices, the fake vendors, the money transfers. He thought I was loyal to him, she said. He thought I would never talk. But I couldn't live with myself anymore. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know. I asked her if she would be willing to go to the authorities. She nodded. "I've already talked to Frank. I told him everything. I'll tell them too." I thanked her. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. We had the evidence. We had the witness. We were ready. I went to the authorities the next day. I laid out everything. The documents, the photos, the witness statement. They listened carefully. They asked questions. They said they would investigate. The investigation moved quickly. Whitfield was called in for questioning. He tried to deny everything, but the evidence was too strong. Patricia's testimony was damning. The documents were irrefutable. A week later, Whitfield was arrested. He was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The news spread fast. The company issued a statement saying they were shocked and saddened. They promised to cooperate fully with the investigation. I watched the report on the news, sitting on the couch with my parents. My mother was crying. My father was smiling. "It's over," I said. "It's finally over." My mother hugged me tight. My father reached over and patted my hand. We sat there together, watching the screen, feeling the weight of everything we had been through slowly lift. The trial was set for 3 months later. Gerald was tried first. He was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Whitfield followed. His trial was longer, more complicated. But the evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to 8 years. Allen was not charged. He had cooperated with the investigation, providing information that helped build the case against Whitfield. He was blacklisted in the industry, but he avoided prison. I felt a strange mixture of relief and resentment. He had gotten off easy, but I was too tired to hold on to the anger. I was offered my job back, with a promotion. I turned it down again. I had no desire to go back to that place, to those people, to that life. I had found something more important. My family. My peace. I started working at a small nonprofit. It didn't pay much, but it felt good. I was helping people. I was making a difference. I came home every evening feeling like I had done something meaningful. Mark and I continued counseling. We worked through our issues slowly and painfully. But we were making progress. He started coming to my parents' house with me. He helped my father with his exercises. He sat with my mother and talked about the weather. He was becoming part of the family again. My father continued to improve. He was still weak, still forgetful at times. But he was more present, more engaged. He started gardening again, tending to his roses with the same care he had always shown them. My mother was happier. She laughed more. She cooked more. The house felt like a home again. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch with my father. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He was quiet, watching the birds. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You did the right thing, even when it was hard." I told him I couldn't have done it without him. Without his strength, his courage, his love. He smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "We're going to be okay, Laura. All of us." I leaned my head on his shoulder and watched the sun go down. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Gerald. I opened it with trembling hands. He wrote that he was sorry. He said he had made mistakes, that he had hurt people, that he regretted everything. He said he knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, but he wanted me to know that he was trying to change. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and put it in the drawer. I didn't forgive him. I wasn't ready. But I felt a small measure of peace. He was where he belonged. The nightmare was over. I went to visit Patricia a few days later. She had moved to a new town, started a new job. She seemed lighter, happier. She told me she had no regrets. She had done the right thing. "You were brave," I told her. "You helped bring down a monster." She shook her head. "We did it together. All of us." I hugged her goodbye and drove home. The sun was shining. The streets were familiar. Everything felt normal. I realized that was what I had been fighting for. Normal. Peaceful. Ordinary. Life went on. I got up every morning, had coffee with Mark, went to work, came home. I visited my parents every weekend. I helped my father in the garden. I cooked with my mother. We laughed. We talked. We were a family again. One night, I was sitting in my living room with Mark. He was reading a book. I was staring out the window. The streetlights were flickering. The neighborhood was quiet. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm better than okay. I'm happy." He set down his book and looked at me. "I'm glad. I'm glad you're happy." I reached for his hand. "We made it. We survived." He squeezed my hand. "We did. And we're going to keep making it. Together." I leaned my head on his shoulder and closed my eyes. I thought about everything we had been through. The betrayals. The losses. The pain. And I thought about everything we had gained. The truth. The justice. The love. I didn't have everything figured out. I didn't know what the future would bring. But I knew I had my family, my home, my peace. And that was enough. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was just rising. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the light spread across the room. I thought about my father, about his struggle, his recovery. I thought about my mother, her strength, her love. I thought about Mark, our journey, our future. I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered on the first ring. "Good morning, Laura," she said. "How are you?" I smiled. "I'm good, Mom. I'm really good." We talked for a while. About the garden, about the weather, about nothing important. Then I hung up and sat there, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The nightmare was over. The truth had come out. The guilty had been punished. The innocent had been healed. And I, Laura, had found my way back to myself. I went to work that day feeling lighter than I had in years. The nonprofit was small, but it was meaningful. I helped people who had been taken advantage of, just like my father. I gave them the support they needed, the resources they deserved. That evening, I went to my parents' house for dinner. My mother had made my father's favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables. My father was in his chair, watching the news. He smiled when I walked in. "Laura," he said. "Come sit with me." I sat next to him and took his hand. He looked at me with clear, steady eyes. "You know," he said, "I used to think I had lost everything. My memory, my dignity, my sense of self. But I was wrong. I still have you. I still have your mother. I still have this family. I told him he had never lost anything. He had always been the same man. The man who had taught me how to ride a bike. The man who had held my hand when I was scared. The man who had never stopped loving me. He smiled. It was a full smile, the kind I hadn't seen in years. We ate dinner together, the three of us. We talked and laughed. We made plans for the weekend, for the garden, for the future. It was ordinary. It was beautiful. After dinner, I walked out to the porch. The stars were out, bright and clear. I stood there, looking up at the sky, feeling the cool night air on my skin. Mark came out and stood next to me. He put his arm around my shoulder. What are you thinking about? He asked. I leaned into him. I'm thinking about how lucky I am. How lucky we are. He kissed my forehead. We are lucky. And we're going to stay lucky. Because we're not going to let anything tear us apart again. I nodded. I felt the truth of his words deep in my heart. We stood there for a long time, watching the stars. The past was behind us. The future was ahead. And right now, in this moment, everything was perfect. I never looked back. I never regretted the fight. I had lost things along the way, but I had gained so much more. I had gained the truth. I had gained justice. I had gained my family. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The trial ended on a Thursday. I sat in the courtroom with my parents, watching as the judge read the verdict. Guilty. All counts. Thomas Whitfield was led away in handcuffs, his face pale, his eyes empty. Gerald had already been sentenced the month before. It was over. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. My mother was crying, but she was smiling. My father walked with his cane, steady and upright. He looked at me and said, "You did it. You brought them to justice." I shook my head. We did it. All of us. We went home and had a quiet dinner. No celebrations. No fanfare. Just the three of us, sitting around the table, eating my mother's pot roast and talking about ordinary things. That was enough. It was more than enough. The weeks that followed were quiet. I went to work at the nonprofit. I helped people who had been scammed, who had been taken advantage of, who had lost their savings to people like Gerald and Whitfield. It was hard work, but it was good work. Every time I helped someone, I felt like I was making up for the pain that had been caused. Mark and I kept going to counseling. We talked about our fears, our hopes, our dreams. We started making plans again. A vacation. A new project for the house. Small things that felt big because we were making them together. My father continued to improve. He walked further every day. He gardened with my mother. He read the newspaper and complained about the news. He was himself again, or as close as he would ever be. And that was enough. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch with my parents. The sun was setting. The birds were singing. My mother was holding my father's hand. They were talking about their garden, about the vegetables they wanted to plant next spring. I watched them and felt a wave of peace wash over me. I had been through so much. We had all been through so much. But we were still here. We were still together. We were still a family. Mark came out and sat next to me. He put his arm around my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I leaned into him. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are. How lucky I am." He kissed my cheek. We are lucky. And we're going to stay lucky. We sat there together, the four of us, watching the sun go down. No more secrets. No more lies. Just the quiet beauty of an ordinary evening. I didn't know what the future would bring. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faced the worst and survived. I had found my strength. I had found my family. And I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. The truth had set us free. And that freedom was the greatest gift of all.